All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 314 of the Health Detective Podcast, rolling right along here. And we are going to be nerding out today a little bit. I think there's a variety of things that we'll end up touching on, but DNA testing will be one of them. I have one quick public service announcement. If you happen to be watching this live, if you're on the audio version, once it comes out, you can kind of skip over this part for the next minute. We have our 5 in 5 workshop going live for the third time ever, starting on March 18th. If you're like, Ev, that sounds cool, but what the heck's a 5 in 5 workshop? That is where we go over a live case study with you guys, with our clinical advisors and course mentors for 5 days straight. So we do about an hour to an hour and a half live, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, analyzing labs, going over the markers, teaching you guys stuff that you probably haven't learned anywhere else. And so there's two uses for this. If you are a health coach that wants to get into utilizing lab testing, or maybe you already use some, but you want to kind of up your knowledge, this is like the biggest bang for your buck that you could ever get. Number two, if you're looking into the FDN course itself, then this is the number one resource I recommend people do, whether it's the live version or the pre-recorded version, before you commit to going through the tuition with us. The tuition is totally worth it for people who want to be FDNs, but the best way to figure out if you actually want to do that is by going through the 5 in 5. So if you do that and you love it, then it's only a matter of time before you do FDN. And if you do it and you don't resonate for some reason, well, you just saved yourself a bunch of heartache and time. So it's fdntraining.com/5 in 5 March 2024. And that's pretty long. So I think I'll bring that up here. fdntraining.com/5 in 5 March 2024. I'll share that with you guys. And that is all for my PSA. We will get to today's episode. So I'll read the bio for our guest. It's a very impressive one, and then we'll dive in. Krista is an integrative health practitioner who practices in the belief that the body was designed to heal when given the proper tools. Totally resonate with this. She's been practicing integrative medicine for 5 years in her private practice and specializes in facilitating healing in cases of mystery or complex illnesses, Lyme disease, mold illness, autoimmunity, gut health, hormone harmonization, anxiety, depression, and disordered eating through an integrative and somatic approach with clients all over the world. Leveraging unique DNA testing and brain retraining, Krista is passionate about using her own pain to purpose story to facilitate the conditions for her clients to choose into a healing journey and step into a state of optimal health using an approach as unique as their DNA. And then there is an amazing list of credentials here, which we will have in the show notes if you guys are listening to the audio side. It's very cool stuff. Krista, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Evan. That was super kind. I'm so glad and grateful to be here.
Yeah, so I'll give a little preface to this because at FDN, we have a wide variety of tests available to us. But we also have our foundationals, and the foundational labs were, they came up with 20 years ago, or Reed came up with them 20 years ago. Now we've updated the science to those. Like we started out with stool culture testing, and now it's PCR DNA testing through the GI map. But that system has proven to last over time. But we're also very aware that there are different testing methodologies out there that are super beneficial. And we even go as far as to say if an FDN's been in the space for a while and they're truly dedicating themselves to high level study, as you obviously have, then they would be appropriate to do something like you, right? I know you're not an FDN, but they would be more than appropriate to go do something like you and maybe start adding on some different labs or trying some different things. So I really can't wait to talk about this today in the context of something that maybe these practitioners can add on long term. But first and foremost, I'm going to take a guess here. Most people didn't get into the space because they were bored. Typically something happened, and your bio did imply that. So what did your health symptoms look like, and when did they begin?
Absolutely. Yeah. So pain to purpose for sure. Looking back on my childhood, it really started in early childhood from birth. So had lots of signs and symptoms, aching joints, sensory issues, sensitivity to overstimulation and light, and then anxiety and panic attacks all through my childhood. So obviously those were signs that something was not quite right. And I ended up going to pursue professional dance in college. And this is sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for me, was just all of that stress on my physical body. Ended up developing 3 autoimmune diseases. And so I was going around from doctor to doctor, and I've always had leaned in a little bit more to the holistic or natural side of things. But after conventional medicine, it couldn't get me any answers, and my labs were actually coming back fine at first. It was really frustrating. And, I ended up getting diagnosed with celiac, Hashimoto's, and Raynaud's syndrome. So, three autoimmune diseases. And I spent about 3 years really chasing those conditions and using nutrition. And my labs at the time when I got diagnosed with all those things finally did show some abnormalities. My DGP for protein was for celiac, the peptide for celiac was off. That was showing positive. My thyroid antibodies were elevated, and I was actually showing markers for fatty liver at 21 years old, non-alcoholic. I did not drink. I couldn't handle a drink at the time. Um,
I completely relate. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How did this get this way, right? I'm not out here eating fried foods. And, I was really leveraging a lot of nutrition at the time too, because I decided, what, I need to really learn how to use food as medicine. Because obviously, certain foods are going to be poison to me right now. So I started that journey going into the School for Integrative Nutrition, and learned a lot there. And so I was kind of like putting these pieces together, but nothing was ever quite getting me all the way there. So I was doing a lot of functional medicine, detoxes, a lot of lab work, and all anybody could ever really offer me was like, well, it's just the Hashimoto's, or it's just your gut. Did stool samples, all these things came back with raging candida. So I did a candida diet. And so by this point, I went from dancing professionally for sometimes 35 hours a week, obviously really, athletic, to hardly able to climb a flight of stairs at 23 years old. And so that was a huge wake-up call. I started having auditory hallucinations in my sleep. I was losing function in my left hand. I was slurring my words some days. And so there was just more to it. And I got to the end of my rope, and that's when I decided to do a pretty unconventional style test, which is the DNA testing, but it's not what most people think, which is that hair tissue mineral analysis. It is actually using the hair almost as a barcode to your DNA to see inside of tissues and cell membranes that you're not going to necessarily get in the bloodstream. And so when this test came back, it was kind of shocking to me, because the last thing that I expected after 5 years of chasing autoimmune conditions that I thought were the root cause was Lyme disease and severe mold and fungal illness. So that was actually what got me into the space of having an answer, a root cause to all of these things, which pushed me into, better answers when I had, that knowledge. So my healing took place under these modalities that are based off of resonance testing, applied kinesiology, biological and functional medicine. And it obviously got me really interested. So now here I am offering those techniques to my clients. And it's definitely been a journey. It was probably about 7 years to get to that point of healing and answers.
It's always sad, but cool. There's probably a better word, but it's cool in a certain sense to
Mm-hmm.
hear from other people who started dealing with these things very young. I'm in a very similar boat. It was like 5 years
Yeah.
old, and there's panic attacks going on. There's a lot of stuff happening,
Right.
and you have no idea what's going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I'm guessing your age now seems relatively similar. Are you late 20s, early 30s?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at that time, I mean, this stuff was even hard to get diagnosed, let
Exactly.
alone, hey, there's actually something productive to do about this that's not
Right.
going to create its own set of symptoms when we take the
Mm-hmm.
medications for it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of scary. And it's always cool, though, at the same time, because I always look at it as a trade off. And I can tell by your passion already, you probably do as well. It's like, yeah, we gave up to a certain degree these younger years, but man, I
Right.
get to spend the rest of my life doing what I love and helping other people. So I might do it again. We'll see. I don't know
Right.
if I would do it exactly the same way, but it's
Wouldn't
a
trade it.
yes, it's a decent trade-off. So
Yes.
you mentioned that you found these like really profound insights on the DNA
Mm-hmm.
testing. I'd love to dive in more to that, because it's not like you didn't do anything prior to that.
Right.
You were doing these other tests. So
Yeah.
what about this was so unique? Let's get into the specifics.
Sure. Yeah. So, I'll just take the Lyme component. So to start, because, Lyme, Borrelia burgdorferi, it's one of the few bacteria that's a spirochete in nature, which means, when it finds a tissue, it turns into that corkscrew shape and it burrows into the tissue. So if you're somebody who's had this for a really long time, your Lyme might be in quote unquote dormancy, as in it's not actively in the bloodstream. So, you're going to do a blood test and you're not going to come up with those bands of Lyme unless they're provoked out of those tissues, or they're active, aka you're in a flare. And so what's unique about the DNA testing is it will scan through the DNA RNA layers of each body system. So for example, you can kind of click in to look at the bile duct of the liver and gallbladder, or the pancreatic duct, or the lymphatic system, and see what's floating around in there that might be creating issues that's not necessarily provoked out into the bloodstream at the moment. And so it can catch a lot of things that we might need as filling in the gaps for the incredible information that stool samples, blood tests, heavy metal tests, all those things give us. So it's pretty amazing technology. It's from Germany. My machine in particularly is from Germany, but it's really based off of science that is traced back, many, many years to Rife machines and technologies and ancient healing.
Nice. And so when you are using this now, like let's say I was coming into your virtual office or regular
Yeah.
office, I don't know. And I was similar to you. I had 3 different autoimmune conditions, and maybe I'm in the beginning of the journey as opposed to, okay, I've done a bunch of functional tests, I've changed the diet. I mean, like I'm pretty fresh off this stuff. So would you, like in your practice, do you just kind of use that testing to start off, or is there any other type of testing that you utilize to get people going? Like again, assuming I'm walking in
Yeah.
and I'm pretty fresh to this.
Absolutely. So it's really case by case dependent, because folks who are coming to us are more so in the boat where they've recently just done a boatload of tests. And so if they've been done in the last 6 months, I use the labs that they already have, because usually it's coming up as, inconclusive. They're not finding any abnormalities, or they've got a few autoimmune conditions. We know that, we can see it in the labs, but they're not getting any results. And so if it's somebody like that, we will use our in-house testing. If it's somebody who's not done a lot of testing, I will sometimes have them go out and do labs. We'll call in lab work for them, just so we can get a better picture to synthesize in. So, we title our reports DNA and blood testing interpretations, because we're synthesizing both pieces of information. But we do leverage not only the bioresonance technology, but also a form of remote applied kinesiology based off of the techniques created by Dr. Klinghardt. So ART, autonomic response testing, and we're able to do that with the hair sample. And so, we test not only the pathology, so we're looking in the report. I would create a report with you based off of your health history and what I'm seeing on the bioresonance scan, as in viruses, bacteria, parasites, molds, allergy, fungus, heavy metal, contaminants, all of those fun things. And then synthesizing that in with the remote applied kinesiology to create a DNA tested protocol for you, as well as see, what foods are setting your body off right now. Because, I usually wait to do a food panel in labs until the end of a process to see what are your true sensitivities versus what foods are reacting with your toxic load right now. So somebody might show up sensitive to coffee or peanuts, right? Because they have a huge candida or, mold burden in their body. And by the end of our process together, they might not be sensitive to those things. So for a lot of tests that most might start out with, I actually save towards the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Krista, forgive my ignorance with this. I just want to make it, that's why we have people like you on the show, right? It's like, I want to actually go in with some ignorance to ask the right questions. But it sounds like when I think DNA testing, the first thing that comes to my mind is like genetic SNPs. This sounds way different than
Yes.
the standard genetic SNP test. When you're like doing the saliva sample, you get 55 genes back, whatever. So I guess other than the obvious, like comparing these things, if I run, a test through GX Sciences, I do use that test occasionally. It's for very specific reasons. I've done it on myself. I just wanted to see what was going on there, but I am getting these genetic SNPs that have been well studied, and there's more and more that we're learning about as time goes on. So it's probably a type of testing that's going to get better and better as the future occurs, just because we're learning more. So for someone that might have this idea of, hey, the only thing I know about DNA testing in terms of functional medicine is genetic SNPs. Again, maybe this is too broad of a question. I don't really know where else to start. Like, how is this different? Because again, it sounds completely different.
Yeah, sure. So this is different in the sense where, so at the beginning I mentioned a lot of folks think of like that hair tissue mineral analysis where, you're looking at, you might be looking at minerals, you might be looking at metals. And then like you're talking about with the more, genetic mutations, finding those things out through saliva tests. This is running off of frequency instead of biochemistry. So that the barcode analogy is the best way that I can describe, but your DNA is your DNA, right? Nobody else has your DNA. And so the technology has a frequency library of healthy cell tissues, diseased cell tissues, as well as the frequency via biophotons and that whole science of light on viruses, bacteria, parasites, mold, fungus, all of those things. And so when it scans it against your DNA, it can detect if it's resonating with some of those pathogens and to what extent it's stressing the body out. So it will give me a priority based on that scan on, okay, this particular, maybe that person has a parasite in their gut. Okay, this parasite is priority more than this other bacterial imbalance in here. And so it runs off of that resonance to essentially compare the frequency library with the barcode to your DNA.
And okay, so now I'm starting to understand it at least a little bit better, as much as I can on a live podcast, right?
Sure.
I'm not retaining as much as if I'm studying by myself, I'm
Yeah.
sure. But that's why, in theory, if you did some work with this person and then did testing again, that's why things could shift, is what you're saying, because you might have been,
Exactly.
okay, cool, very interesting. Versus, if I did the GX Sciences saliva panel 100 times in my life, I'm literally 100% of the time I'm going to get the same answers, because that's never going to change.
Right.
Whether those are clinically relevant at any given time might differ. Like by the time I
Yeah.
ran my genetic SNP test, the irony was I had terrible methylation issues, which correlated greatly with what I had at one point, but I already felt good by that point.
Yeah.
I never knew my genetics until I was already in a great state of health. So it did change some things. I take some methylated B vitamins now because of it, just to be a little safe. And I had mildly high homocysteine, so I figured that can't
Okay.
hurt. Probably good for me. But most of the stuff was covered. So this is really interesting. Now, I am someone who has seen the power of some of these things, especially you mentioned the Rife machine. There's a lot of cool things that happen there. Of course, this is a different area of the sciences than,
Yes.
like peer-reviewed stuff around blood work. And
Sure.
it's not me challenging it, but some of the smartest minds in the world are behind these things. That's what's
Yep.
really interesting, but they are not necessarily pharmaceutical companies aren't prioritizing the studies behind this stuff. So
For
I guess
sure.
what I'm trying to get at is how without challenging you, like genuinely just asking, how do we know that this works other than anecdotes? Is there anything outside of that shows that this is valid?
Yeah, sure. So, essentially the field of science that you would want to look at in terms of how this is all working is quantum physics and biophotons. And again, that science of light and frequency, and going back to, chatting about the Rife machine, chatting about ancient wisdom and of how long muscle testing, applied kinesiology has existed in the chiropractic field, and that we can, physically and tangibly see the state of the body and the nervous system changing via resonance testing and muscle testing. But sadly, like you said, there's not any funding behind this. And so those studies are not going to be that we're actually not putting money into researching the effectiveness of these studies. And so it's not making any money for big pharma. And so that sadly, it's not really out there to the common eye. But if folks want to learn, more about that, I would definitely encourage them to look at, renowned doctors like Dr. Klinghardt or Dr. Jernigan. And so those folks have really done a lot to expand and educate functional medicine practitioners into the efficacy of this testing.
Cool. Yeah, the Klingart people, even the ones trained 2 or 3
Yeah.
tiers under, they're always very impressive. I've never found one that's
Mm-hmm.
not impressive. Actually, their credentials lists end up looking very similar to yours. Maybe even with some doctorates. It's nuts.
Yes.
There was a friend that I had locally, and she would drive up almost 50 minutes to go to a
Mm-hmm.
doctor who was trained that way. And I mean,
Yeah.
she sent me a picture one time of his wall of just the stuff that he had trained in. Like these people are very
Yeah.
intelligent, and it's not the first thing that they've studied. It's not like they just became dogmatic about one thing. Certainly that's not the case here. You tried a bunch of other stuff. So when you're coming up then with, I guess, the protocols or the self-treatment methods for
Sure.
these people as a
Yeah.
result, what does this look like? Because like in the world of FDN, we might say, okay, we're going to remove some foods for some while. We're going to do very targeted supplementation. We're not throwing you on stuff for the rest of your life. We don't believe in that. But certainly if you can afford it, these supplements can assist for right now. And we're huge on changing the lifestyle stuff. Like if
Mm-hmm.
we don't get the lifestyle right, then you might end up with the same things that you had before, no matter what we do. So I'm very much oversimplifying this, but that's how a
Sure.
stereotypical FDN protocol might look. What might a stereotypical protocol look
Yeah.
like off someone's results with this if they're coming in super sick?
Absolutely. So similar, right? Like this is the basis of functional and integrative medicine is, lifestyle and dietary changes. And the crux of integrative medicine is do no harm. So start with least invasive. Going back to this idea that, a lot of folks have tried everything by the time they got to us. And that was the boat that I was in. We leverage in tandem some different services. So we'll test out, it might be herbs, it might be homeopathies, it might be bioenergetic remedies, it might be dietary supplements, but it's all tested against organ priorities from their DNA to neutralize the stress at a root cause level.
Mhm.
So they'll have their supplements, but in with that protocol might also be at-home services. So these might be things like red light therapy. It might be lymphatic drainage practices like dry brushing or different massage techniques. It might be different forms of enema therapy or ozone that they can get into their house. As well as we emphasize everybody who comes through our 12-week flagship program has a brain retraining and neuro-emotional technique experience as a part of their program. Because that is what I learned in my own experience, like the last 20% to really get them over the finish line when they've had these infections hijacking their limbic system for so long, which is the part of your brain that, really works to keep you going the best that it can in the presence of imbalance. So if it learns one way of doing something, we have to teach it a new way in the absence of those toxins and infections. So we really come at it from like a full mind, body, spirit approach. So they'll have supplements and services as well as their nutrition. We'll test their foods and recommend that they remove them for a short while, but going back to testing and retesting, because we do testing before, middle, and after during a 12-week program, we actually see those food sensitivities diminish greatly because we might be working on the things that are wreaking havoc in their gut, like parasites, fungal overgrowth, bacterial imbalance. And so a lot of these things I say, hey, for the first 6 weeks, I want you to take these foods that came up for you as a problem out of your diet, but let's check in on that 6 and 12-week mark, because usually a lot of them come back, which is really exciting for folks.
Totally agree. Generally speaking, the food sensitivities are something that we look at as a temporary thing to remove, not a permanent thing, right? That's the whole point.
Exactly. Yep.
Otherwise, some people that come to us would be screwed because they're down to like 5
Right.
foods by the time they end up with a functional practitioner.
Yep.
Listen, obviously we titled today about DNA testing, but of
Mhm.
course there's always more to these conversations.
Sure.
And I was very interested in what you just mentioned with the brain retraining. And since it is a part of your guys' program, I'd love to
Yeah.
touch on that because, looks can be deceiving. You don't seem particularly unhealthy anymore. It looks like you really got some vitality back. And you
Yeah.
can see this. I look at videos of myself from 8 years ago.
Mhm.
It was just the color and I
Yes.
couldn't you speak very fluently, right? I couldn't do that. There was a
Mhm.
lack of energy. You can see the person just not doing well. So clearly these things are working is my point.
Yeah.
And the 20% that you described is so relatable. It's something that
Mhm.
happens all the time here at FTN. And that's not to dismiss what we're doing. Reed
Sure.
talks about how often, there is more to this. When he started, he was just, hey, let's focus on labs and this very purely biochemical side,
Mhm.
which I guess does overlap with the other things, but
Sure.
there is a mental emotional thing. And what's interesting, I was just doing a recording the other day, not for this, but for a separate thing that FDN's doing called Holistic Health Week. And we talked about how traumatic experiences didn't lead to the person's symptoms. What ends up happening is sometimes the symptoms and diseases are so
Mhm.
severe, you now
Mhm.
have trauma from experiencing the stuff. Like your
Exactly.
story's not easy. My story wasn't easy.
Yeah.
So this really becomes an essential part of healing in a lot of cases, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So with that prefaced, because it's not just all labs, no matter how cool they are,
Mhm.
what does the brain retraining, like what does that mean in your guys' practice and what does that look like?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that trauma piece due to the illness because that's huge. That's it also becomes like the safety of familiarity, right? Because we oftentimes without even trying build some sort of identity or comfort with where we're at and that sometimes can prolong healing as well. So in our practice, we leverage a few different techniques. The first one is a piece of technology. So we are partnered with BrainTap Technologies. They're just fantastic, Dr. Patrick Porter. So everybody who onboards in our 12-week program actually gets a headset and a membership for the 12 weeks, the first 12 weeks of their program. We encourage them to use it, every day. We'll recommend certain folders based on what's going on with them if we're working more on the mental emotional or the physiology. And so, that's obviously up to them to put that into practice, but we recommend they use that every day if they can. And then we have a few brain retraining calls where we get on and I work with them one-on-one, using an integration really of neuro-emotional techniques, so NET, parts and memory therapy, developed by Dr. Jay Norix, Sedona method, a little bit of body code. So we're really working our way through, depending on what kind of processor that person is and how, the trauma is manifesting at that moment. Because some are, have really done a lot of emotional work already and we can get right into it. And then others, we kind of have to crack the door open slowly. And the goal is to keep them in their bodies, get them, regulated in their nervous system, and essentially teach the brain a new way of functioning. Teach them that, the mold trigger is safe, or the food sensitivity is no longer a threat, because the brain remembers that as a protection mechanism. And so we even have a community for that. We're actually getting started with our next cohort this next week, next Friday. But we call it Renew, because it's essentially a process of renewal of the mind, and getting folks in to learn how to do that on a day-to-day at home. Because, it's great if you and I come on here and we do some brain retraining, we do that emotional breakthrough experience, but then, we go about our day, we get an influx of stress and input and new information in our nervous systems, and we might jump right back to where we were. And so we want to teach everybody how to do that for themselves at home and lock in the work so they can really have a fast track forward in between our sessions.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of people come in having already done emotional work, and that's like saying I've done lab testing. Okay, what kind? How
Exactly.
often? Like, what does this mean? And a lot of the times, emotional work sometimes could mean something as, and I'm not underplaying it, but as simple as therapy, which is
Yeah.
good. I have done that in my life for certain things,
Right.
but at the same time, I think that's just as limited as 1 or 2 laps. Like, it might get you to
Yep.
an 80%, but there might need to be some other stuff. Like, all right, I've said this enough times that I get it. Like, I'm acknowledging that this exists. That's a very important first part. But then just because you acknowledge that it exists, it doesn't mean that everything's fine now and that you're
Right.
not still utilizing habits or defense mechanisms in your life on a daily basis that came from those things happening or occurring. In fact, I've almost found that more awkward at times for myself when I have the self-awareness now to know why a pattern exists, but it's not healed. So it's
Yeah.
almost like I'm watching myself in third person saying, I know better. I'm aware of this. Why am I doing it? It can actually be very demoralizing. It feels
Right.
defeating. Like, it's one thing if you don't know what you don't know. Then you kind of feel like you get a hall pass. But
Yeah.
it's like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I know why I just impulsively spent that money. That was pretty dumb. I should know better by now.
Yeah.
We have to go back and do that kind of stuff. So really cool that you use Brain Tap. My fiance and I use that. We have an in-person business, believe it or not. I know a lot of
Awesome.
people do it virtually, but
Yeah.
we just added that in to see what would happen. And so many people have amazing benefits from it.
Yeah.
So is there anything, and not to give away secret sauce, I'm not looking for that,
Sure. That's
but
okay.
is there anything brain retraining wise, because you did mention people can take stuff home, are there some tools or tips that people can utilize from listening today or watching today that they could start doing? Yes, it's not going to heal everything they've ever dealt with, but if it helps
Yeah.
them 5%, that's amazing for a podcast.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, my favorite technique out of all of them is parts work. And this is based on the concept of multiplicity of the subconscious mind. And so we use it in everyday language all the time, right? So it's like a part of me wants to go out to dinner, but a part of me also wants to stay home. And so when we feel incongruent, we feel that inner mental battle and resistance, it's because the parts of us aren't harmonized. Maybe one of our parts is stuck in a memory. Maybe one of them is trying to protect, but they're kind of doing it in this like dysfunctional way or pattern by closing off. And so just as a basis, I encourage folks to read No Bad Parts. We can link that. I'm going to totally, forget some of the authors right now, but No Bad Parts. You Were Never Broken. That one's by Jeff Foster. That one really, really culminates the language that we want to try to use to repattern self-talk. And so it really is about getting curious and non-judgmental towards those parts of yourself and feeling somatically, where do those emotions sit in your body? And what do those parts of you need to say? What are they remembering? When did they start doing their job? And we teach people how to do that in our community brain retraining. We teach them how to do it one-on-one. And so, of course, shameless plug, that's a great place to start if you want to come, join our community. But if you want some at-home resources, definitely looking into those books would be wonderful. You can hop on and find licensed therapists through Parts and Memory Therapy's website as well. So they're not leveraging all the other techniques that we're integrating it with, but that is a fantastic place to start. You might find some that, you can even use insurance coverage for if that's something that is available to folks. You could find a therapist who takes it potentially.
That's awesome. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
might maybe we can try to pull that up on the side here and put up some of those books for people. That's great. And if nothing else, I'll try to get it in the show notes. I absolutely can work on that.
Awesome.
You mentioned a 12-week program.
Hmm.
That's, I'm sure it changed a little bit for everyone, but
Yeah.
that's, you got to start with something. I have the same thing. You have to
Hmm.
have some framework. You can't
Right.
really edit something that doesn't exist. So you need to have
Uh-huh.
or customize something that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So with that said, what type of people are you guys attracting now? Because I know that in the functional medicine space, if we want to call it that, even in your bio, it's
Hmm.
so obvious you work with a large variety of people. But I
Hmm.
find that if you work with enough individuals, there is kind of a core group that seems to come to you. Like I end up attracting a lot of autoimmune people or
Yeah.
others who have dealt with like severe cystic acne. That was one
Hmm.
of the things that I dealt with. So who's
Yeah.
kind of coming to you, and then what can they expect if they wanted to work with you guys?
Sure. Yeah. We've really honestly diversified a lot in the past year. We're working with, I would say the primary, like archetype of our client is probably, female 20s, 30s dealing with chronic, autoimmune. It usually goes back to Lyme mold or parasites because we always end up working with the folks that, are similar to our cases, as you mentioned, but we've also started working with children and more geriatric clients that have come in, and some of them are dealing like the kiddos with maybe ADHD or autism, just mystery symptoms like rashes or food sensitivities, maybe eczema. But then we also have space for those who are just looking to optimize their health with a different approach. So no matter who you are, when you come to us, we start you with, we call it DNA testing onboarding. So it's 3 appointments. We do a really long clinical consult because it's really unfair if I try to fit your whole health history in our free 20-minute consult. That's not doing either of us any good. So we take a lot of time there. We have a 75-minute review of findings to really break down the story of you and go through your healing plan. And then we do a 15-minute follow-up for questions. And at that point, if you're somebody who is maybe mild to moderate and you are pretty self-sufficient, you have some background knowledge on, a holistic approach to healing, we might put you into, a modified version, as you said, of that 12-week. But if you're somebody who's more chronic and you need all the bells and whistles, we're going to encourage you to go for that 12-week program. But before they even start that healing journey, everybody just starts in that DNA onboarding process because, as I like to say, you wouldn't expect to go on one date and ask to marry the person. So I like to get them in, have an experience together, go through that testing, and let the client decide, do you feel that it's good, that we're aligned to move forward together? Because, I want both of us to feel that way. If we're going to continue, I believe that being aligned with your teammate, your health,
I like that.
guide is really important to your healing process.
I think that's a really good business tip too. This is tough work, and you're going to take on the things that people have dealt with, which is
Yeah.
not necessarily bad. It actually is a really honorable thing to help kind of work through that with them. But you
Hmm.
want to make sure you like the person, and ideally they want
Totally.
to like you. That's always
Yeah.
a good thing to start with. So I kind of like that. We'll feel out the water, test the waters at
Right.
least, and then we can move on to the next thing. To the degree that you're able to
Mhm.
share, do you just have like maybe off the top of your head, like one or two like awesome client stories? I always love the stories of people who come to someone like you or an FDN
Mhm.
practitioner or whoever hops on here, and they're
Yeah.
at the end of the rope, man, and they just feel like this is the last thing they want to try,
Mhm.
and then it's the thing that works. So do you have any stories like that
Yeah.
offhand?
Absolutely. So the two that I can think of, I'll go with this one. Pretty severe mold and Lyme case. Couldn't work. Mom of some kiddos. Couldn't drive. Really just incapacitated by dizzy spells. Was definitely chemically sensitive, and it was really hard starting out for this person. And we worked diligently together for about 6 months and got this person to a place where they were able to get on the floor and play with their kids, drive her daughter to a dance lesson, and really have life again. And that was a beautiful transformation, but it was hard. It was hard for that person, going through detoxification. You have to sort of go through the dark to get to the light, so to speak, right? So as you're detoxing out, a lot of times it can feel like you're getting worse temporarily to get better, because all of these flares that you're having are those pathogens waking up and coming out of hiding. And ultimately, we want to chase them all the way out of the body and letting them go, instead of letting them go back into dormancy. And so that's one story I'm thinking of, just super dramatic turnaround. I mean, this person documented photos of their process. And it is just, I mean, it gives me chills every time I look at her before and after, and the progression of that is just astounding. The other case that I'm thinking of, pretty similar, also had some severe liver issues going on, some very severe rashes and skin issues and fatigue and migraines, all these things tracing back to root causes. And so again, that was a hard case. It's hard for everybody to really, okay, we got to just keep going. And it's that teamwork piece, which is why I do have folks get to know us during the onboarding, because there's going to be times that they want to give up, and we've got to have that mutual trust of like, okay, it's going to get a little harder, but it's going to be so worth it at the end of this process. And this person, again, went from being, unable to work, going back to work, having energy, being able to go out and rake leaves in the yard. And it was just a beautiful transformation. But the emotional work was a huge part of them getting success after several different, programs that they had tried prior to us.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of transformations, if I may ask, only because it seems like, again, huge strides have been made. How are you doing with your health stuff? Because listen, we have people that come on here, there might be 85% better. I look at that as a win, because there's people right now that would kill to be 85% better with what they're dealing with. So there's no right or wrong answer to this. I'm just genuinely curious. If you had to say, okay, at this point, 7-8 years ago, I'm at 0%. How much better do you think you've gotten since then?
Oh, totally. I would say I'm between 85 and 90, because, we always have things that we deal with. Like, health is a never ending journey because we live in a toxic world.
Yes.
So, I want to let folks know, like, my health isn't perfect all the time. Something that I discovered was, that I have a genetic SNP that predisposes me to a really severe mold allergy. And so if I get exposed to mold, it kind of shuts down my circuits because my body doesn't know how to methylate it and detox it out. And so that's something that I'm even learning new techniques, not only the brain retraining, but allergy desensitization and ozone therapy. And it's really pushing me into these other techniques that I would have otherwise not known about. But my Hashimoto's is in remission. My gut health is great. My liver looks awesome, and I no longer show up for Lyme disease. So those are some major wins from my own journey, and I would say it's going really well.
Well, and and thanks for the transparency, because again, it's like, it's not always about getting to 100%. And I don't mean this, some people might not like this. I like to be real with stuff.
Totally.
For those of us that have been sick for 10, 20 years sometimes, I don't know in today's world, unless you're going to go full remote, I mean, off grid, and really do everything self-sustaining. I don't know if 100% is realistic. We weren't supposed to be living in all this. And not to mention, it's not like things are getting that much better. We have some small wins coming up with glyphosate, but for every small win, then they throw up a 5G tower or something like that. There's always going to be new things. It's not to be paranoid. It's just, again, being real with the situation.
Exactly.
But the difference from what you were describing at one point, not even be able to really go upstairs when you were doing 35 hours a week of dance at one point, and now being back here, it is so hard to get on live and, again, speak verbally fluently after I'm sure you've worked today so far, and just recall stuff off the top of your head. There are people suffering right now that used to be able to do those things, and they can't anymore.
Absolutely.
So to get that back's like the biggest blessing. All right. I have a kind of a different kind of trajectory I want to go down for the last 5-10 minutes here. So for the practitioner standpoint, do you guys do anything for, like, our coaches are probably going to be listening to this, or a lot of them will listen, and they might say, well, hey, could I use something like this with my clients? Maybe this is something for after the podcast. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
How could the coaches utilize some of the stuff that you guys are doing if they wanted to?
Yeah, absolutely. So the technology that I have is not open to, any practitioner, that particular machine. However, there are some machines that are quite similar in nature that they can get their hands on. So they could invest in that. And of course, everything, none of this is diagnostic. It is, detection essentially. And so they could get their hands on that. We'd be happy to consult with them on the neuro-emotional side about the brain retraining techniques, and talking to them about how we prioritize issues in our DNA reports if they, would like that. So we're always happy to chat with fellow practitioners and, have those conversations. But I could definitely, provide some of those technologies that are on hand, and some of maybe the trainings that have helped me a lot over the past few years for them as a resource.
Sweet. Cool. Thank you. We can talk about that afterwards too, and get that figured out. I'll have that in the show notes for you guys. Or we'll just post it in our graduates group. We'll get something figured out.
Awesome.
What are, this is totally just a fun question. What are the
Okay.
next steps for you? Because again, you already have like this amazing list of stuff, and it's not like you're 60, 70 years old. So I can only imagine what the next 30 years is going to hold. What's the next thing that's being pursued?
Yeah, so right now I'll graduate with my doctorate next year,
Nice.
2025. So working on some, dissertation topics and all of that. Currently training in a muscle testing technique called CPK. And honestly, really hoping to expand my own education and do an internship for fun. I'd love to go, be mentored a bit more. I did a lot of, business and functional medicine coaching with a really, really amazing functional medicine doctor this year, and I just want more. I want to be able to get my hands on new techniques and new wisdom, because I just feel like we're never done learning.
Yeah.
So right now our practice is all remote, but we are looking to go into an in-person space. So I'm located in Charleston, and we're working on that. So, folks that are local, or if you want to come visit us and travel in from out of state, we would love to see you. So that's in the works, hopefully within the next year or so, to get that up and going.
Bless you, my friend. I did the in-person thing. I'm like, how do I escape? But I'm
Yeah,
kind of joking because there's something so special about like watching. Like you can see people on Zoom, you can get the picture,
yeah,
but when someone's coming in regularly and you can watch the life
yes,
come back to them, it is like we've had some sick people come in. And when
yeah,
you're watching that, like it's like, oh, okay, this is really cool. And there's a different interaction, obviously, in person
yeah.
versus online. So that's amazing. And then not to mention from the business perspective, I can't say that it's not extremely credible. I don't know if I would have started it for that reason. And obviously you guys aren't starting it for that reason.
Yeah.
I don't want our FDNs to think, oh, now I need to go brick and mortar. We're not
Right.
saying that. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, yeah, when you have a sign, when you have a nice office and those things, it
Mm-hmm.
is a lot more credible than just trying to
Yeah.
build things completely online. Like people know that this is legit. Otherwise, you wouldn't have set it up that way, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And for the practitioners too, we were brick and mortar, and then we pulled it because we were starting to
okay,
work with folks nationwide and a little bit out of country. And so we were like, oh, our efficiency is down. But now
back
that
to
our team is growing, we're merging back into that model. So it can look so many different ways and ebb and flow with your seasons of life. So
yes.
yeah, I guess don't be afraid to change it based on what's going to be, the most efficient or effective at the time.
That's I feel like my gosh, we might have to have you on for something entrepreneurial wise because that's like entrepreneurship 101. You have to be
Yeah.
able to change and adapt, especially in
Hmm.
today's world. Things can change in a matter of like hours, depending
Totally.
on who says what online or what
Yeah.
platform shuts down. So I'll say that too. That is one thing I like about the in person. I don't
Hmm.
trust Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I don't mean that
Yep.
in a conspiratorial way. It's just like you shouldn't trust that. If that's the
No.
only
Yeah.
way you're getting business, and Meta can pull the plug on an account tomorrow, maybe
Mhm.
someone hacks you and they
Right.
say something like profanity and then they block you because of that, right? So
Yeah,
there's a million
totally.
things that could happen that wouldn't make me want to rely my business solely on
Mhm.
that. And you can't take away the in-person stuff, at least not easily.
Yeah,
Um, so that's cool.
totally.
As someone who does continue to learn and you've done a lot of other things, and you mentioned that you will sometimes utilize other lab testing.
Mhm.
I don't want to confuse our FDNs who have been taught a certain way, but I think we need to be critical thinkers and
Yeah.
hear other perspectives. So you mentioned a food sensitivity panel. It sounds
Mhm.
like it seems like you alluded to blood work. We didn't say that directly, but outside of the genetic testing, then and the way that you guys do it,
Mhm.
what are some of the other types of labs that you might use more frequently than not? I'll word it that way.
Yeah. So more frequently than not, we will leverage the Dutch test for hormones, GI map for the gut, and then honestly, one of the biggest things I will send folks for is a thyroid panel. Because we need to know, and sometimes we need a little bit more support in that regard. So I'd say those are the three most popular, which the GI map and the Dutch is so fantastic because we could just send those kits right to their house, rather than finding them the suitable arrangement for their labs. But right now it's a little bit tricky when your FDN is such a beautiful setup where you can call in those labs, and I mean that is such a gift for practitioners to have at their fingertips. For us, it's a little bit trickier because we're working with folks out of state, so sometimes we end up leveraging letters and things like that with their primaries to get them what they need. So yeah, I would say those are the three most common, but we're really big on partnering with doctors that they might be working with from their primary care as well.
Sweet. And before I ask where people can find you guys, you said we and us like a million times. And you know what? I think it'd be cool to shout those people out. Who is the we
Yeah.
and us other than Krista? Because you seem cool. Birds of a feather flock together. I want to know the team. Like, what's going on?
Absolutely. Okay, so we have an incredible health coach. Her name's Corrine Ward. She is my wing woman, and we integrate her, and everybody gets to meet her. She's in the chats all the time. That's something pretty, I think, special about our programs too. Is we have a member and a clinical chat open all the time. So we're chatting back and forth with our clients. We're not just, hey, see you the next call. So she's very instrumental in that. And then we have our wonderful admin assistant, who's actually my mom. So Cherie Morton is
Wonderful. I like that.
giving mom a shout out. Yeah, so she's been awesome. She does all of our beautiful, carousel posts, and she's back and forth scheduling folks. So I could not do this without them, for sure. And I'm very, very grateful. So that is the team as of now, and we're growing. We're excited.
Nice. That was just so funny the way you set that up. I'm sure if mom hears this, she's going to love it.
Oh, she's going to be thrilled. I'm sure she's watching right now.
Hey, mom's the first person we call when we can't make someone in
That's right.
the business that day, because we do like red light therapy and stuff. So some of it's very simple check-ins and check-outs. Be like, hey, mom, you what are you doing at 10 a.m.? So they're the best.
That's awesome.
All right. Now, where can people find you guys if they'd like to work with you? Because, of course, regardless of whether you go back in person or not, well, sorry, you are, but you'll still work with people online. So if someone is interested in this type of testing, where can they find you guys?
Yeah. So we get a lot of inquiry through Instagram, at Somasonder, SOMASONDER. You can also visit our website, which I think will be in the show notes. And I think the best first step, honestly, is just to get on the phone with us. We do free 20-minute consults, and let's just have a conversation about, if our process is going to align with what you're looking for. We also have a podcast called Unbound Health and Wellness. And Corrine and I often will collaborate on those episodes. So it's great to hear from her as well in that platform. And then we do, have Facebook. And that's about it. We're not on TikTok. I can only manage so many social media platforms at once, but you can get everything you need. Honestly, best way to learn more about working with us is just to visit the website, which Tracy just so kindly posted in the comments. So that's the best way.
Very cool. All right. Our signature question on the show that we'll finish up with today is, it's not too tricky. Don't worry.
Okay.
If we could give you, you're like, oh, what he's going to hit me with. If we could give you a magic wand and you could wave it, and you could get every single person in this world to do one thing for their health. So that means you could force us all to start doing one thing, or you can force us all to stop doing one thing. What is the one thing Krista gets us to do?
I would wave my wand and encourage folks to practice radical self-acceptance, because you could do all of the nutrition, all of the labs, all of the lifestyle, the working out, the walking, the sleeping good in the world. But if you don't have that inner peace and acceptance of all the parts of who you are, you're still going to be stressed. And so you can find peace amongst any radically challenging circumstance if you have that ability to harness all the parts of your mind and really just be one with your nervous system and your body.
Dang, that's a podcast in and of itself. All right. Thank you so much for coming on today. Super, super impressive what you guys are doing. And I loved talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evan. Really, really grateful to be